Sequels are tricky to pull off well. Making a game out of scratch is also difficult, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of factors that go into making a sequel. You have to make sure the game doesn't stray too far off from the source material, continue the story in a satisfying way if it's the same continuity, and you have to live up to the expectations that the previous game set up. Pokemon Colosseum was well received when it first came out, and people were wondering if there would be a second attempt at the formula. And about a year later, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness was released. Now, ever since I was a young child, I have loved Pokemon Colosseum. I played it all the time and I just fell in love with the world and gameplay. However, throughout all of my childhood, I have never once actually played Gale of Darkness. Now, why was that? Well, for one thing, I was a kid. I didn't have a job and I rarely picked out games for myself to play. Whenever given the chance to play it, my eyes almost always was caught by something else. Another reason is that at the time I did not like how the game looked. I thought the designs looked a bit too cartoonish compared to the original, and because of it I never gave it the light of day. But that's about to change. This is my first time ever playing Gale of Darkness. Will it live up to the previous game, or will it just be another common case of sequels being unneeded and inferior to their predecessor? Let's find out together. Our story begins out in the ocean, where a boat named the SS Libra is taking a cruise. However, suddenly a very strange-looking Lugia attacks and steals the ship, leaving the crew out in the sea. After that, our attention goes over to this young kid named Michael, who is the son of Lily, a woman who works at the Pokemon HQ lab under one Professor Crane. Their research goes to all things Pokemon, but is currently focusing on Shadow Pokemon. While Wes and Rui did capture almost every Shadow Pokemon known in the last game, and put a stop to Cypher's evil deeds, it seems like the group has revived in some way and is currently going through the process of creating more Shadow Pokemon. After going through some errands, you come back to the Pokemon lab and see Professor Crane kidnapped by members of Cypher. While the rest of the team is distraught, they ultimately get back into gear to continue the research and save Professor Crane. From here, the game takes you to locations new and old to stop Cypher's new plot, such as going to Fanac City to deal with Snaddle trying to infest the city, investigating the old SS Libra before getting your Snag machine stolen, which is admittedly a very cool moment before you get it back from Team Snag'em, and then going to Cypher's key lair to stop any further production of Shadow Pokemon. After dealing with Gorgon in said location, the new phase of Cypher is revealed to you by one named Greevil, an old man you saw near the beginning of the game. He mentions that their new Shadow Pokemon XD001, otherwise known as Shadow Lugia, is now fully prepared. He also just flat out tells you where his hideout is on Dark Isle, which why? I'm aware he thinks that the area is impenetrable due to a storm or something, but you're just begging for someone to just come right to you and destroy your plans. Sorry, I got sidetracked. From here you go to Dark Isle and completely foil his plans. We capture Lugia, defeat his full team of Shadow Pokemon, and he sees the error of his ways due to his son or something. Thus ends Pokemon Gale of Darkness. Overall, the story is rather cookie cutter for Pokemon. Not all that much more complicated than Colosseum's, really. Evil organization is doing evil things. You go ahead and stop them. I do think that the story is a lot better at giving you a reason as to why you're going from point A to point B. There was certainly a reason why Wes and Rui were going to each location, but it still felt like you were just going to different locations and just happening upon Cypher doing evil. While with Gale of Darkness, it's put on the forefront why you're doing what you're doing. Why are we going to an abandoned Cypher lab? Because Professor Crane was kidnapped and that is our best shot with the information we're given. Why are we going to the Team Snag'em hideout? Because our Snag machine was stolen by them and we're trying to get it back. Why are we going to Railgam Tower to have fun rather than see what's going on with Fanac City? Because this lady honestly thinks that battle simulations are fun, and that's the best joke in the game. Ultimately, though, it's still your average Pokemon plot. Silent protagonist adds nothing to the current situation. Evil dude gets sort of redeemed for no real reason, and there is no deeper meaning or subtext to look into. A boring story, but it's not like I was expecting much out of a Pokemon game, and it's not the reason why you should play a Pokemon game. Now that we've gone through the formality of looking at the story of this game, let's get to the real meat and potatoes. Gale of Darkness follows close behind the footsteps of Pokemon Colosseum, doing many of the ideas that the previous game did. They are still next to no wild Pokemon, and you're mostly capturing Shadow Pokemon from opposing trainers. And now we have a lot more Pokemon to go around as opposed to last time. The last game had a total of 52 Shadow Pokemon to capture, and this game brings it up to a whopping 83 with a few other evolutionary lines to get on the side as well. This sounds great, right? More choices means an easier time picking out a party, and overall means a better time with the game. However, I do think the game stumbles a little bit with this idea. You see, in this game, now there are trainers that can have more than one Shadow Pokemon on their team. And near the end of the game, they start overloading trainers with Shadow Pokemon, to the point where the final boss, Gale, has 6 Shadow Pokemon. 7 if you want to count the Shadow Lugia before his fight. So most of the Shadow Pokemon out there are in the last bit of the game, well past where I would even bother adding anyone new to my team. The latest I would bother capturing a Pokemon in this game would be Zangoose, which is around the 34th Shadow Pokemon. This makes more than half of the Pokemon you can get in the game less desirable in my eyes. And I hate to say that as well because honestly, I think the selection of Pokemon this time is also rather weak. Now please take this part with a grain of salt because it's very subjective to my own tastes. But the Shadow Pokemon early in the game just don't appeal to me all that much. I still managed to pull together a full team, all of them being favorites of mine. But I wouldn't feel like future playthroughs would make me want to vary my roster all that much. I could probably pull together a team if I tried, but overall I just think the roster is weaker than what Colosseum had. However, that's not to say they're all bad apples. As I said before, I did manage to pull together a team in the end. I wouldn't say it's as well crafted as my last team, but I would still at least like to go over it since the team you build is an essential part of any Pokemon game. This time around, I actually bothered to use the starter that the game gives you at the beginning of the game, and I evolved that Eevee into an Umbreon. Umbreon is a great defensive tank, able to take as many hits as it's required. And for a game where you're capturing a lot of Pokemon in long battles, he was a great first pick. And even afterwards, when I started doing post-game content, he was still a wonderful tank that could stall out most enemies thanks to Substitute, Moonlight, and his held item that was leftovers. I just wish he didn't have to wait so long for Toxic, otherwise he would have been amazing. After him though, I struggled with finding a good Pokemon to get in the early game, until I eventually gravitated towards Ampharos. Ampharos may have been slow, but he was relatively bulky and very strong offensively. If the enemy team was foolish enough to use Rain Dance, a Quick Thunder would be enough to one-shot almost everything. He also had Light Screen on him to protect the team if need be. However, only having 2 Pokemon this early into the game didn't exactly sit right, and I found an option in Ariados. I love Ariados and I wanted to use him again for a while, but he's not really a good Pokemon. However, some Shadow Pokemon come in with moves that they usually wouldn't have, and Ariados has Signal Beam in his starting lineup. And since this is before the physical special split introduced in Gen 4, this was an 80 power stab move with a physical fighter. This alone made Ariados a pretty reliable Pokemon. I still had to choose her battles very carefully, otherwise she would have very easily died. But she was still very reliable for very specific situations, and had quite a decent move roster to help out whenever needed. In the ONBS building, I found 2 more Shadow Pokemon that would become permanent members in my party, them being Ralts and Vulpix. Ralts was very squishy until we evolved her into a Gardevoir, but once she got rolling, she got rolling. Gardevoir has always been a favorite of mine since my first playthrough of Pokemon Sapphire, and she served me very well in this playthrough. Great special attack, great special defense, and was able to outspeed a lot of Pokemon. If Ampharos was too slow to defeat an enemy, Gardevoir was worth trying since she also had electric moves. And she had Reflect for some party support as well. Lastly, she had Trace, which was a very fun ability to mess around with. It wasn't always useful, but the moments it was, she absolutely popped off. I don't have it recorded, but she was in a battle with a Ninjask and traced its speed boost. From there I used Calm Mind a couple of times and made sure she didn't die, and from there she just swept the entire enemy team. It was amazing. Next up was Ninetales, which I absolutely had to use. It's my favorite Gen 1 Pokemon, and it's the Pokemon in my profile pic. Of course I had to use her. There isn't a whole lot to say, as Ninetales isn't exactly a versatile Pokemon. It took special attacks well and hit with good fire-type damage. Heat Wave was very helpful in certain fights though, and Confuse Ray made her useful to some degree in fights where she would be doing nothing. And lastly, she had Protect, and you know exactly where this is going. Some things don't change with teams, and this time I had an Earthquake user in Flygon, my favorite Pokemon from Gen 3. Though I will be perfectly honest, I don't think this was a great choice on my end. One thing I didn't account for in the game was the lower level range as opposed to Colosseum. Where Colosseum had you start with level 25 Pokemon and ended with level 60 enemies, Gale of Darkness starts you off at level 10 and only goes up to about 50. With Flygon evolving so late into the journey, she was a useless Trap Engine Vibrava for most of the game. But once she started rolling, she was amazing. Earthquake is a fantastic attack, and if used correctly can be absolutely devastating. Not only that, but she also had a great moveset to make the most out of situations. Pesky ice types giving her trouble? No worries, she has Flamethrower to take them out before she gets rocked. Don't want to hit your ally with Earthquake? Just hit them with a stab move like Dragon Breath or Dragon Claw. While she struggled through the main game, she certainly made it up in the post-game. Overall, I don't think this team is as good as the last one, but I was able to make it work and have fun with it. The looks and sounds of Ori have changed quite a lot from the previous games, and I have to say that overall I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. To start out with something that hasn't changed in the slightest, it's the whole look of the region. Many of the areas you visited in the last game make a return in this one, and they still look absolutely stunning. But of course this game has some new areas as well, and I think they are great additions to the Ori region as a whole. Gation Port is a beautiful harbor area that just screams resort area, and it's a great first town to get accustomed to. Being able to explore the ruined remains of the SS Libra is a wonderful experience, until you have to walk up on these ledges. Then I lose my patience with how many times I accidentally jump off the ledge. And Citadark Isle makes for a much better traditional final area than what Railgun Tower was in the last game. However, what about the character designs themselves? I said before that I did not originally play this game because I did not like the look of the characters in this game. But now having actually played the game myself, I can say that I was not very bright as a child. The main problem with the characters in the last game was that the game didn't have a very distinct style. The models looked pretty uncanny all things considered, and it just sort of blended into everything. However, in this game, they at the very least attempted to go with a visual style, one that is a lot more cartoonish and in my eyes a lot more in line with Pokemon. Personally, I really like it, as it makes characters feel a lot more recognizable and memorable. Characters like Lovrina, Eldris, Ardos, and Gorgon all stand out to me. Really, the designs look great all around. Except for Snaddle. I hate him and his dumb dab he does when you beat him. And Jovi's eyes, I swear, is a portal to the underworld itself. Anyways, music. The OST for this game this time around has been rather disappointing, honestly. For one thing, the battle themes from last game are pretty absent. Unless if you're participating in a Colosseum battle or fighting Rider Willy, who makes his grand return, you never hear the original battle themes at all. And that's a shame too, because I adored the Cypher theme and the semi-final round theme from the last game. But that shouldn't be that much of an issue so long as the new songs are good, right? Well, honestly, I don't think the OST holds a candle to the older stuff. The normal battle theme is just as grating as the last game, and the Cypher theme gets on my nerves just as much. The new world map theme is just inferior to the previous game, which I failed to mention in my last video. And the new area themes outside of the Pokemon Lab after Professor Crane gets kidnapped are all forgettable to me. However, there are some good songs in here, mainly the new boss theme, which sounds so much better than the last game. And of course, Mirror B comes back and brings along the best theme in the game yet again. Presentation overall is a mixed bag compared to the last game, but I think what Gale of Darkness gets right, it really gets right. And lastly, we arrive at the additional content in the game, and boy oh boy am I ready to get into this. For one thing, Colosseums have been cut down quite a bit. It completely got rid of the Under, Fnac, and Deep Under Colosseums and only brought in Realgam Tower Colosseum to compensate. That makes for only 2 traditional Colosseums to go through in the game, which just feels so wrong with how prevalent they were in the last game. But the other side content we got makes up for it, right? Right? Well, Realgam Tower gives us 2 more activities to play through and they both suck. Starting with Pokemon Bingo, you're just pretty much trying to get a bingo with Pokemon battles throughout. There is no strategy to these. You can completely get away with matching types in the early cards to get easy wins. And then once we actually get to the later ones, it's completely luck based on if you even get Pokemon that can deal with the enemy, even if you have the type advantage. Any sort of strategy that could be shaped is completely taken away due to dumb luck or just you being at a complete disadvantage for no reason. They also just take way too long, because you're fighting 11 Pokemon battles, one right after another to get a full card. They are short battles, but they are still individually loaded battles and it just becomes time consuming. And battle simulations don't fare much better. You're thrown into a Pokemon battle with preset Pokemon and enemies, and it basically works as a sort of logic puzzle with you needing to use specific moves to get the upper hand on the opponent. I've never been a fan of these preset battle things that games like to do, as it just throws you into very abstract situations where you beat them not by thinking things through, but instead trial and error. Not to mention that you have to wait way too long for a fight to start, as you can't skip the intro to these fights unless if you're retrying them. Not to mention the rewards are absolutely dreadful. Like wow, I paid 500 Pokédollars for an unfun preset battle, and all I got for it was an awakening. And then there's Mount Battle. After the last game, with how tedious most of Mount Battle was, I vowed to never trek up this mountain ever again for my own sanity. So I decided to go up this mountain again, and man, how could you make the most tedious grind in Pokemon outside of shining hunting even more unfun? One way, and that's scaling levels. In the previous game, you started with Pokemon around their 25s and finished Mount Battle fighting against level 60 Pokemon. Gale of Darkness is not all that much longer than Colosseum, so the level should still be around the same. Let's see here, you start with a level 10 Eevee, and the last fight on Mount Battle is level 70s? Are you kidding me? There's a 25 level gap from the last game, when both games are around the same size. Not to mention the wimpy team that the champion had last time isn't so wimpy anymore. Now he's rocking legendaries and actual meta picks for his gen like Dusclops and Salamence. With this sort of odds, I had to grind, and I hated that I was forced to do that because at no point in my playthrough of Colosseum did I ever have to grind. This sort of thing boosted my hours dramatically. What took me 28 hours to do in Colosseum took me 51 hours to do in this game. That's just not right at all. And I did all of this for a stupid Chikorita that I'll never use. What a waste of my time. Lastly, we have the Ori Coliseum, and if Gale of Darkness had one saving grace with its side content, it's this. This Coliseum actually takes a page out of the Battle Frontier, where you fight Pokemon built for competitive play with fixed levels. Now I'm just going to say, I'm not a competitive Pokemon player. Half of my team should be good evidence enough that I just use Pokemon I like, rather than what's actually good. Even still, I went through this whole Coliseum, and I had a pretty good time, all things considered. It got frustrating at times, but that's probably because I didn't have a very competitively viable team. It took a lot of resets and a lot of, well, cheating, because I save stated after every battle, but I eventually made it to the top with a rematch with Eldis. I think what really sells this is that the whole game is double battles, which already adds a lot more strategy than normal Pokemon play, and it makes for some of the most fun I've had in a Pokemon game. I'm glad that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Oh yeah, I'm not counting this Coliseum, the only thing that's really left to do in post-game is fight Mirror B one more time with this boring Ludicolo only team. So post-game is also very absent. So then, what are my final thoughts on Pokemon Gale of Darkness? Well, I'm certainly glad I finally got a chance to play and finish it. as it was a game I was avoiding for the longest time. However, it's a little tricky to rank it alongside Colosseum for a multitude of reasons. For one thing, I'm super nostalgic when it comes to Colosseum, so finding a verdict that doesn't have some sort of bias would be extremely difficult. Another reason is that I personally think that Colosseum and Gale of Darkness have their own high points and low points. I find Gale of Darkness' main story to be a lot more fulfilling, but in turn I find Colosseum to have a lot more fulfilling side and post-game. I find Colosseum to hold the better soundtrack overall, while I think Gale of Darkness looks a lot better. But if I had to give one game an edge, it would be Colosseum. I enjoy the roster of available Pokemon a lot better in Colosseum than I do in Gale of Darkness, as well as the game starting out with higher leveled Pokemon as opposed to any other Pokemon game. Do not take this to mean that I dislike Gale of Darkness. That is not the case in the slightest. I'm so glad I played this game, and I'm certain I will get back to it at some other day. If you ask me, I think Gale of Darkness stuck the landing of a good sequel just fine. Now for just a minor channel update, I've been meaning to get into a rather large project soon, with a series that I've adored for a very long time. Before I do that though, I'm going to look at some minor and shorter games. Hopefully I'll be able to get through those videos a bit quicker than I did with these videos. And then after that, I will be starting my very first marathon for this channel. I hope you stay tuned for that, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.